And self-help author Marianne Williamson is back in the race for the White House, continuing to campaign on changing the unsustainable status quo. Williamson said earlier this week she is, quote, unsuspending her campaign just 3 weeks after announcing she was suspending it. On Tuesday, Michigan voters went to the polls, where Williamson finished with 3% of the vote. Joining me now is presidential candidate Marianne Williamson. Marianne, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So in your video, you said you are unsuspending your campaign. You call the race, quote, a car crash in slow motion. Tell me why you're back in here.
What was that last thing you said?
Why are you back in? Why are you back in the race?
Well, when you just referred to my saying it's a slow motion car crash, I do not believe that President Biden is a strong candidate for 2024. I think he deserves respect for winning in 2020 and some of the things that he's done. But I think that the dynamics in America today are very different than 2020. You've been showing some really fine coverage of what's going on in Gaza. And I think we need a real ceasefire candidate, and I am that candidate. And I feel that when I got out of the race, that conversation became diminished, obviously. Also, we have 39% of Americans who are reporting that they are regularly skipping meals in order to pay their rent. Over half of our democracies, over half of our bankruptcies, come from medical debt. We have 1 in 4 Americans living in medical debt. So the conversation that I've had throughout this campaign has to do with a serious economic U-turn and addressing the fact that we have ubiquitous economic despair in this country. So between the domestic issues that I talk about, which are very much in contrast to the president claiming that somehow the economy is good, it's good for 20% of Americans, but those 20% are living on an island surrounded by a vast sea of economic despair. So my conversation in this campaign, domestically as well as internationally, is one that needs to be out there. The American people need to know that they have the option of a complete new direction and a new chapter in American history.
So, Marianne, I do want to ask about your funding. Is money still pouring in? Where are you getting support from?
Getting support, obviously, some people are saying, "Okay, you're back, and we'll keep this going." And, it's a grassroots campaign. There aren't independent expenditure groups that are paying for television ads. This is how the system works. The system is rigged so that really, and this is what you really see being in the belly of this beast. If you do not have large amounts of money or access to people with extremely large amounts of money, the system is designed so that you can't get anywhere near the pinnacles of power. That's one of the reasons I suspended, of course. It's like if you can't have the money for television ads, what happens in a normal campaign, if you don't have these huge amounts of money, such as $1 billion available to the president, then you're either deciding, am I going to pay to get on ballots or am I going to pay for a campaign? And this is the way you get pushed out. But once I was pushed out for that reason, I realized how wrong it is. The democracy cannot work that way. We need to have voices, and the American people need to know what their real choices are.
You mentioned the economy and health care. What would you do differently if you were in office, Marianne?
We need an improved Medicare for all. We have 1 in 4 Americans living with medical debt. We have 68,000 people who die every year from lack of health care. We have 18 million people who cannot pay for the prescriptions that their doctors give them. That's not just an issue of the uninsured, but also the underinsured, which is 75 to 90 million people. There are millions of Americans whose insurance will cover for them to go to the doctor, but it won't cover the tests the doctors prescribe. It won't cover the medicine people prescribe, that the doctors prescribe. We have 1.3 million Americans who are rationing their insulin. There is no other advanced democracy in the world that does not have universal health care. That's what we need. And when people talk about improved Medicare for all, it needs to include eyeglasses, hearing aids, dental, and also today, mental health crisis. And also, when you add to all of those numbers, the fact that millions of Americans are working at jobs they hate for no other reason than that's where they will get their health care benefits. This is not good for your economy.
Sure.
And also, when you have Medicare for all, so many businesses, the relief that will be taken off the shoulders of businesses because they will no longer have to provide health care for their employees.
We mentioned earlier in this segment that you walked away with 3% of the vote in Michigan. I do want to bring up 2016 with Jill Stein. Many say she cost Hillary the election. Jill Stein stayed in the race. She got 1% in the general. Do you think this is very similar to what we saw with Jill Stein in 2016? Do you think you're taking votes away from President Biden?
It's First of all, I was suspended at the time that I got those 3%. I was on the ballot, but I wasn't even running as a candidate when I got that 3%. This is completely different than Jill Stein. Jill Stein is running in a third party. I'm running as a Democrat. You can't be a spoiler when you're running in a primary. That's just a false narrative created by the DNC. This is a primary. People primary incumbent senators, people primary incumbent Congress people, and so this is not a Jill Stein factor. I am not running as a third party candidate.
Thank you for answering that question. If Biden does win the party's nomination, will you support him?
I would never do anything that I felt in any way would help Donald Trump get near the White House again.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.